But looking at the risks versus the benefits is the critical issue with medication. For the most severely disturbed individuals, I think we have to be very careful about which medications we use. And there are a lot of medications we can use that are less toxic than the antipsychotics, although occasionally I think we do still need antipsychotics. And medication use is still this is from a recently published article looking at the National Nursing Home Survey in the States, and it suggests that in the U.S., almost half of the residents in long-term care are on an antidepressant, about a quarter on an antipsychotic, and about 12% on benzodiazepines. So still very high prevalence of use. So lastly then, looking at the actual care system, mental health care system, obviously we look to the intrinsic system, so care provided by frontline staff of the facility versus consultants, mental health professionals, outreach teams coming into the home, and we need both. And Steve Bartels describes different models of intervention. There's not been a lot of research really in terms of what's most effective, but there is a suggestion that the traditional approach, where you just have a lone clinician coming in, often a psychiatrist, doing a one-time assessment and written consultation on an as-needed basis, is not the most beneficial system. So I think we certainly believe that the intervention by a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary team is much more effective, and one that incorporates ongoing education. In terms of organizational issues, of course, education and training is critical, and I would suggest that you take a look at the article in International Psychogeriatrics, which summarizes all of the literature in this area. So it looks at the most effective long-term care education and training models and the evidence in support of these different models. And then it looks at best evidence for staff education and training, specifically for dementia or depression. It's mostly around dementia, so studies from all over the world, and including McCaney et al., which was looking at our PISA system here in Ontario. So that comes from that's the article itself. And they actually conclude by suggesting that the real issue, of course, is not just providing education and training, it's whether that leads to any behavioral change amongst the staff. So that's, for educators, that's the critical issue. It's, you can put in a program, it's often a one-time program, does it really have an impact? So they actually looked back to a model by Servio, 1985, that's 25 years ago, who suggested that when you're looking at this particular issue, whether you get behavioral change, you should look at the quality of the educational input, individual motivation, then the nature, complexity, and acceptability of the proposed change initiative, in this case education, and then the receptivity of the care environment and its organizational context. So, but some of the things they mention with reference to specifically to education in long-term care would be doing a needs assessment and really working with the target audience and figuring out what do the staff themselves really feel they need and what type of educational intervention is really going to work for them individually as a team. Then, if possible, trying to use well-validated educational programs. That's not always possible to find, but there are some out there. To always address the issue of sustainability. It's one thing to put in a one-shot deal, but what about sustainability? And also getting the commitment and support from the organization itself and from the administration. Without that, you're lost. So in conclusion, the literature on the effectiveness of special care units is sparse. There are no randomized controlled trials. Some studies suggest less use of physical restraints and more optimal use of medications in special care units versus usual care. There's little data on staffing levels required, but it's clear that we need a significantly higher level of staffing for a behavioral support unit with a full complement of health disciplines. There are several models for mental health service provision that exist, and actually John Snowden from Australia has summarized the evidence for this also in that same edition of International Psychogeriatrics. But certainly there's a clear need for involvement of staff with high levels of expertise and experience in such units. And finally, of course, we need education and training of staff using models that are highly effective. So I think I'll stop there and pass you on to Maggie. So.
Thank you.